What is up guys, Major here. Today we're going to be ranking the most devastating debuffs in Dislyte. So first of all, we have speed down, which reduces speed by 30%. So anything that's going to reduce speed or attack position is going to be extremely strong in this game, because you can do that for basically everything from PvP to PvE, and affecting the move order of certain characters is going to help you out a lot in disrupting the enemy team formations and the kind of things they want to make sure that they can achieve. After that, we're going to have attack down, because that's just more broad spec. So when you have attack down, effectively you're just decreasing the amount of damage you're taking across the board, and attack down reduces the attack by 40%, which is a good solid number. And then we're going to have defense down here, which reduces defense by 60%. This is again a nice little broad spectrum debuff. You can't go wrong. You're increasing the amount of damage you're doing to the enemy team, reducing their defense by 60%. It's honestly, you can't go wrong here. And then after that, you have some of the more interesting ones where you have miss rate up. Now, miss rate up is actually quite interesting, because what this does is increases the miss rate by 50%. So the chance that your opponent has to actually hit you, it's basically dodge. It's actually super strong in the right situations, and especially if you can do it on an AoE level. And then right after that, we have bleed, which is one of the stronger debuffs actually in the game. They'll receive true damage equal to 50% of the attacker's attack stat at the start of the turn, which is extremely powerful depending on how strong you have your attacker stat. And I believe this is also per stack. And then beyond that, we have seer, which is again another general kind of debuff, which is really just solid overall, which increases the amount of damage you do effectively by 25%. It one step down from a straight up attack boost, but this time it's sort of, you can stack it on top, right? So it's stack it on top of your attack boost. So instead of getting a 40%, now you're getting about 65% boost there. And then after that, we have a unique debuff, which is the Eye of Horus. Now, some of these unique ones, they're sort of specific to certain characters, but it could easily be a debuff for any other character. But the fact of the matter is, they're a combination of a few things. So with this one, with the Eye of Horus, is when this debuff expires, the carrier receives true damage equal to 20% of the total damage they received during this debuff. This is extremely strong, because as soon as they have that debuff on them and your whole team attacks them, at the end, as soon as the buff expires, that 20% true damage of all that damage, so that's a lot of damage. Now, this is lower than your seers and your attack ups and all of that kind of stuff, or rather attack downs and stuff like that. That's because with this one, it's more dependent on the character themselves and how good they are in general, and how you could utilize that as well. As good as it is, it wouldn't be as consistent as something like a seer or something where you can just put it on and just kind of get that damage going and reapply it consistently. But it's also a really, really solid and really strong skill. And then after that, we have a link. Link is actually quite a powerful skill. So effectively what it does is it links two units together, and then the counterpart receives true damage equal to 80% of the damage dealt. This means that you could effectively debuff one character. For example, if you use the Eye of Horus on one character, then you use Seer on that same character, and then you attach a link to that character and another character, and then you attack the character who has Seer and the Eye of Horus on them. That is gonna make sure you're bursting down two targets instead of one. So that is extremely powerful. Link used in the right way could also be extremely strong. Again, this is one of the more unique skills as well, because it's tied to a particular character, but it could easily be across the spectrum. You could easily see more characters coming in with these abilities. They don't have to be tied to a particular character. They seem to be debuffs that could kind of be broad spectrum. And then what we have after that is disease. Now, disease is a super strong skill, and it's actually super useful. You could argue that it should be higher. It really depends. The way I've sort of marked it down is things that are going to keep you alive and make you do damage are the things that are higher rated, and then the other things kind of come back below. But disease is one of the stronger ones. So what this does is it it negates the opponent's healing. So anything that they have to heal with, it effectively negates that, and they won't be able to heal, and that's self-explanatory. And then now we come to the disabling portion of it. So petrification, in my opinion, is probably one of the better crowd controls. So basically what petrification does is the target won't be able to take actions, but beyond that, they won't actually be able to reduce their ability cooldowns. So even if their turn comes, their ability cooldowns are not going down. That's the difference. But it's also a lot harder to petrify people depending on the characters you're using. So it can be, so there's a bit of a price to pay for how good that actually is. And then one step down from that is going to be your freeze. Now freezes and stuns, they're effectively the same thing. So both freeze and stuns are going to make sure that your opponent can't take actions, but they will be able to reduce their ability cooldown. So that's where the difference between freeze, stun, and petrification is. Petrification is a much better debuff, but at the same time, it's a lot harder to land in some instances, while freeze and stun are much worse debuffs. Freeze is better than a stun in the sense that you could land freezes a lot more frequently than you would land a stun. But quite honestly, that's just how the characters are designed. It could easily be the other way around, because with stuns, there's usually a % chance that it stuns, while with freezes, for the most part, they like to make them 100% chance by default, as in like it just freezes. So it depends. It might be the only thing that's dependent there might be your accuracy and the opponent's resistance. That's sort of determining whether they freeze or not, or stun for that matter. And then one step down from that, it's going to be your taunts. Taunts is effectively a strong version of silence. So what silence does is your opponents won't be able to use any abilities, and all they'll be able to do is basic attacks. Now, what taunt does is effectively force silences on everybody who's taunted anyway. So even if they have their abilities up, they can only standard attack, basically use their basic attacks, but they can only basic attack the character who taunted them, which is why it's stronger than a silence. And then below that is Nether Bloom, which is another unique debuff, which effectively triggers an explosion after 5 stacks, and this deals damage which carries over to 2 additional enemies. Now the reason it's strong and it's above a silence is because by definition, the fact that this is attached to a particular character, the way it works is once that triggers the explosion, she throws silences out and everybody gets silenced. Well, if they don't resist it or anything like that. So it's sort of like she gets the damage boost and silences at the same time, which is crazy when you think about it like that, which is why it's slightly above the silence. And then right underneath that, then we have the silence, right? So that's kind of how it is. So taunt, Nether Bloom, and silence. I feel like taunt is the stronger of the 3, and Nether Bloom comes in second, and then third is that silence. And then after that, we have sleep, which I feel is probably the more useless of all of these crowd control skills, because all it does is gonna make the opponent sleep, and then they can't take actions until they're attacked. So unless your character is the slowest character in the formation, in other words, you're sleeping them last, if you sleep them first and you attack them, they're all gonna wake up. But if you sleep them all last, then they don't get their turns. But it's not entirely turn-based because people's speeds are different, so people attack in different intervals. So it's a lot harder to really take advantage of that, especially if it's an AoE sleep. If it's a single target sleep and you're doing like controlled attacks, that could work. But again, it's more PvP. It's not really broad spectrum. It does work, but it's kind of hard to use. And then beyond that, you have Pandora's Box, which is under sleep. So Pandora's Box is one of the unique ones as well. So this takes effect at the start of the target's second turn, removes a certain amount of percentage of current HP, and then inflicts a stun for 1 turn. There's all this hullabaloo of things that need to happen before you can stun a target, so it's honestly not that great. But at the end of the day, it is a crowd control effect, but it's one of the worst ones overall, in my opinion. But you might want a delayed stun, depending on how you want to play it. So depending on how you build your team, that could actually be really good. Now, after that, it's going to be your poison. Now, poison, yes, granted, we could make an argument for having it a little bit up higher on the list, but at the same time, all that really does is that there's a loss of 4% of max HP at the start of the turn. So you need to really stack this up, and then that's gonna sort of chunk the enemy out of a lot of HP. Here's the problem with that. There's a lot of ways to clear debuffs, and that one is one of the easier ones to clear, to be honest. like granted, all of these debuffs are fairly easy to clear. And then we have the combination of Death, Scorch, and Shackle. These are all unique debuffs that come from specifically Sun Wukong. The reason I have them this low is because of the inconsistency that it provides. Like, there's no way to truly build around this, because it's either he lands a Death, lands a Scorch, or lands a Shackle, and you really don't know which one it's going to be, but all of them are good. So your Death would be inflicts additional damage equal to 5% of the target's max HP, up to 50% of attack, while Scorch is inflicts diseased for 2 turns upon damaging the target, so that's really good. And then Shackle would be reduces the target's AP, attack position effectively, by 15% when damaging them, so that is also good. After that, we're going to have Devour. Now, what Devour is going to do, and it's a crowd control skill, but I put it way down on the list here just because what it does is prevents the target from taking actions, but then it also adds being selected, being attacked, and being buffed or debuffed. That might sound good, but sometimes the thing is when you have your target immobilized, you want to be able to do damage to them, while this just kind of prevents the target from being attacked or anything. So in the same state that you devour them, they're going to come back out the exact same way. It's a good way to kind of hold the target in place, but you can't really, take advantage of that if you can't kill the rest of the team while that target is devoured, which is usually for 1 turn. So it's not the greatest in my opinion, but it could be good. The idea behind it is actually quite interesting. And then last but not least, I left Buff Blocker at the end. Now here's the problem with Buff Blocker. Buff Blocker is all that's going to do is prevent your opponent from buffing up. Now, the issue with that is just preventing your opponent from stacking up buffs isn't really doing anything for you, right? So it's okay, it's decent, and for some characters it might be worth it. But here's the problem: the characters who really need buffs have undispellable buffs, so you can't even you can't buff them. You can't debuff them with a buff blocker because their buffs are undispellable, right? So they'll gain them no matter what for the most part, right? So there's some interactions I haven't tested, so it's good to test some of these, maybe with somebody like Ra, to just test his Burning Suns and see if he can still stack those even though he's under a buff blocker. So maybe after I've had PvP fights and things like that, just to see if that works or not. But for now, buff blocker doesn't seem like it does anything for you unless it's buff blocker and something else that your characters have. I mean, I wouldn't choose that over so many other debuffs that you have to choose from. All right, guys, that's gonna be it for this video. Hope to see you guys in the next one. Hope you guys got value. Hope you guys got some ideas on what kind of debuffs you might want to have on your teams, the kind of combinations you might want to do, because this also helps out with team building as well. Think about that for a second. And I will have videos where I take the stuff into consideration when I do some team building guides and stuff like that. But for now, we're just kind of exploring the debuffs that are in the game. All right, guys, see you in the next one.